Chances are you've already grabbed your smartphone several times to tweet, post, or like something on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Google are just a few of the platforms competing for your time and attention. A Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma exposes a darker side by showing how much social media can control and consume our lives.
Congress isn't sitting still. In October, a House subcommittee released a 449-page report attacking Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple for degrading privacy. The report said these firms have too much power, and that power must be reined in and subject to appropriate oversight and enforcement.
The problem is the business models of these social media companies are designed to get you to use it all the time, and that's the way they can sell advertising and do more of it. I mean, all I can say is, people need to wake up and go, wait a minute, I need to look at what's really happening in the world and not be so addicted.
But it's an addiction that may be growing stronger during the pandemic. With fewer activities available, the solution is often to spend even more time staring at a screen. Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
For more on the impact of social media, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Sunnyvale, California is Liz Miller. She's a vice president and principal analyst with Constellation Research, a technology research and advisory firm. From Gainesville, Florida, Andrew Selepak is a program coordinator in the Master of Arts in Mass Communication program at the University of Florida. Seth Berenzweig is the founding and managing partner of Berenzweig Leonard here in Washington, D.C. And finally, Tom Westgarth is a consultant with Oxford Insights in Barcelona, Spain. Welcome to all of you. Seth, there's so much conversation about whether these social media giants should be regulated. A lot of criticism from Congress. What do you think? What would regulation really look like?
Well, that's an important question that I think is going to continue to get a much more focus as we head into the new year. These social media companies are really now operating like toxic pipes that are leaking fake news and sewage that are being empowered and turbocharged by algorithms that no one really recognizes are happening in the background and AI. Here in Washington, D.C., the United States Congress has had many hearings. They've had hours of testimony trying to drill into the very question that you're raising. Well, what do we do about this? And I think that there are basically two paths that are being discussed by lawmakers here in Washington. The first path is one where they're going to be looking at using the antitrust laws as a sledgehammer to try to break up big tech so that you can, for example, see important cases that were just filed as recently as yesterday against Facebook, trying to break the company up and pulling the recent acquisitions out. The more productive path, I believe, that's going to have a very significant impact is the cutback or repeal of what's known as Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. That is an immunity, a blanket grant of immunity to these social media giants, which is really out of date, out of touch, and really needs to be changed. That's the way that you change behavior, because the way social media is being fed with fake news that's being turbocharged by all these algorithms and AI right now, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult for American business and global business to really get back up on its feet and to put COVID-19 behind it, because there are roughly 40% of people in America, for example, that are concerned that they either don't believe in the pandemic or they don't believe that they can trust the vaccine. So the answer is to have more information, more thoughtful hearings, and to really take a look at, for example, a new bill that Tulsi Gabbard just introduced this week, looking at a cutback or a dramatic change in the blanket immunity law. That's going to have huge repercussions and could dramatically change the way that we digest news and social media.
Should there be more than just putting a disclaimer on there from Twitter? I mean, there's also a lot of questions about whether there's a double standard. Other people's accounts get suspended, but not the President of the United States, because he's the President of the United States. Seth?
It's such a great point that really needs further discussion, and I agree completely. There was a point made a moment ago that this will be a difficult path forward. to be able to fix the infrastructure of social media. I agree with that. But the pathway through that, and to address the answer to your question, is to have these big tech companies accept a greater amount of responsibility for their own conduct. For example, you talk about the information that's been sent out by President Trump and a lot of the background information that's led up to the election, such as the Hunter Biden laptop dramatic conspiracy. Well, you know, why not have some kind of a public level policy, process, or procedure that the social media giants can put forth so that there's no more controversy, there's no more conspiracy theory, and that there's some kind of an objective level playing field so that when people listen to Jack Dorsey on Capitol Hill talking about what they're doing, it just doesn't turn into a political circus or a carnival fest. So I think that one of the things that can be done is that social media companies adopt much greater responsibility and self-regulation to make sure that there is a more realistic and transparent filter through which we receive our news and politics.
Seth, let me get your final thoughts on this.
Sure. I think the level of political division in America will stop going up only when the circle of blanket immunity through the Communications Decency Act statute comes down. There are Americans that are being fed lies and toxic falsehoods every day about votes being changed in Germany, that there's going to be a revolution, and that Mr. Trump is actually winning the election. Once we're able to have responsible leadership and guidance in terms of changing the law and having meaningful regulation in Washington and stop going through these antiquated statutes such as the antitrust rules, I think we'll be able to have a much brighter future here in America and abroad.
Andrew, very quickly, we're almost out of time.
I would say that we were divided in the 1960s. We were very divided in the 1860s when we had a civil war. There's a lot of problems. Social media is contributing, but it's not the only problem that we have to deal with.
Liz, do you agree with that? It's certainly not the only problem.
It's certainly not the only problem. It's certainly not going to be the last time we see this kind of division, but I think we as individuals have a responsibility to listen to people and actually start to open up our ears and not so much rely on platforms to solve our problems, but perhaps respond to each other a little bit more.
We're going to leave it on that positive note. Our thanks to Liz Miller, Seth Berenzweig, Andrew Selepak, and Tom Westgarth. A very good discussion indeed.